Well, from the many phone calls and visits that there have been over these last days, there is a pattern that's emerged. And perhaps this story that's been told before, a very famous Rumi story, will allow us to glean what that energetic pattern is, not only from the story, but from where we're at ourselves at this particular time. And it's that story of that great king of Isvahan, who was ruling at a time when Sufism was enlightening and edifying monarchs and populace alike in the great lands of what is now called the Middle East. So this king of Isfahan, he ruled with great kindness, with justice and fairness and compassion, and he spent a lot of time in contemplation and pondering about the deeper lessons of life that arose from the experiences that being a monarch brought. But one night this king went to sleep and he had a dream. He dreamt that his only and very beloved son died in most tragic circumstances in front of his very eyes in the dream. So he woke up in a state of great distress, pain, anguish and sadness. But recognizing it was a dream, the realization that came out of it was the transient nature of life, the ephemeral nature of life. But he did not go deeper into its deeper meaning, but allowed his emotions to reign. And those emotions took him into creating a problem that had to be fixed. And in an endeavor to solve this problem, he decided that he would have to find a wife for his son. They could have an heir, and then this would create a continuum. So of course his thoughts were linear, as we know emotions take us. So he immediately sent out far and wide messengers to find a suitable wife. Now from his Sufi teachings, and from that humility that comes from that, he was seeking a young woman who was not a pampered and spoiled princess, but maybe a simple girl who had a good heart and would make him a good wife to take over the kingdom. But parallel to this part of the story, in that town there was an old crone. She was 90 years old. She'd never been married, but she had such great beauty that she'd had numerous lovers who'd come to her doorstep. And she was beautiful for a long while, but now, of course, her breasts had sagged, the skin on her face her hair had turned like the color of dirty sand and so forth. But she still had never been satisfied with love. She longed to have a lover, she longed to have companionship, and the object of her desire was the prince, the son of the king, Farik. But in an endeavor to win him, she went to have her sagging breasts lifted. She put rouge and kohl around her eyes. She dressed in the finery. But of course all it was like a dilapidated house that had garish and gaudy painted doors and windows. But, Prince Farik was brought up in the Sufi tradition, and of course he had that focus, he had that one-pointedness that was there. So when he rode his horse past her shack, and she was out there trying to get his attention, which she did in her desperation. She's told that the Quran was something that uplifted you and made you immortal, so she pasted bits of the Quran all over her, thinking that would restore her youth. But anyway, back to Farik. He would ride past on his horse, and of course with his training he would just ignore her. But this old crone was so desperate, her longing was never fulfilled, so she decided to call on the devil for help. So she went to the devil himself, Satan himself, and implored him. Well, she was such an ugly old hag, even Satan could have truck with her, he didn't want any time for her. And when she kept making her importunings to him and begging him for this or that, he even got to the point where he waxed a little bit spiritually lyrical, saying, now why don't you just go into your heart and find the beauty in yourself and not worry about these outside things. But of course, she kept haranguing him. So finally, and of course even Satan is not able to restore our youth, but he did give her a little sachet of powder, and when you threw this powder on anyone, it made them see a little bit like hash or something like that, I suppose. You know, that's what those things are supposed to do, isn't it? Make the world seem all very flowery and beautiful. Anyway, he was supposed to use this powder and sprinkle it on, and that would make you think that everything was absolutely beautiful. So, as it happened, the king of Isvahan found a suitable bride. She was the daughter of a great sage who lived on the outskirts of his kingdom, and so the wedding was arranged. Now, on the very day that Farik was riding his horse off to meet his new bride, there was the old crone on the side of the road with her bits of Quran stuck on her face and her coal eyes and her rouge on. And as he was passing, because of course the devil said, this will only work with someone who is not paying attention. And of course Prince Farouk, riding on his horse, was preoccupied with the thought of his bride to come. So he wasn't paying attention. So when he rode by and the old crone came out with her sachet and tossed it on him, he stopped his horse. He descended and turned to see this beautiful creature. He immediately fell in love. She was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen in his whole life. He got down and kissed her feet. And from that time on, they became lovers. He did not see anything else but this creature. A year passed, and of course, the king, who'd been waiting for his son with his bride, was distraught when he learned where he was with this old crone, and he sent messengers. He brought soothsayers, he brought physicians, everyone, to try to bring Farik back to the fold. But Farik was smitten, absolutely smitten. He was blissfully in love. The king was beside himself. He forgot. He totally forgot his ponderings and his contemplations. All he was absorbed in was thinking about the loss, the non-fulfillment of that which was going to solve his problem. But then, almost like it was in a dream, but it wasn't a dream. the king suddenly had a realization what he'd been doing, and he immediately turned inward, dropped the thoughts of the problem, realizing that it was his own mind that had created all of this. And as he sat in contemplation, a great field of light approached him, and of course he could see and feel that it was some blessed messenger, and he recognized in that messenger that it was one of the great, great magicians of the gods. Now, the story of how that magician took away the spell that was cast on Farik is the stuff of another story. But suffice it to say that after the battle between this great being and that force, that spell that had kept him encaptured, was broken. Prince Farouk came back to his father with a sword and a shroud in his hand, knelt down in front of his father and said, "Father, kill me because I have erred." And his father got down beside him and said, "Oh, my son, I too have erred, but we have learned." Of course, there was a great wedding, and we know what happened after that. They lived long lives, ruled very blissfully, and had many sons. That's the way of these stories. So perhaps out of this, there's two questions. What is it that is this energetic that's around at this moment that we perhaps experiencing in one degree or another for ourselves? And what is it that this king missed when he allowed his emotions to rule and did not go deeper than the realization of the transience of life, which is linear, a beginning and an end of all things, which is of existence and life. But when we go deeper, what is it that we find? So two questions. What is this energetic that's there, ready to grab us at the moment? And what is it that we find when we go deeper? Or we could say higher. Because, with Divine Mother, when it was witnessed many, many times, when someone came to her with a great trauma in their lives, or they were very agitated or in angst about something, she would say to them, "Don't worry, I'll put you in your spirit body." What could that have meant in our parlance? What could that mean in our parlance? Where do we go? What is it? What is it that takes us out of the linear, that contains these three levels of existence, which are all levels of mind? So what is this energy that's abounding? And what is it that is our antidote to it, if you might call it that? We do know it. where does karma not exist? Absolutely.
What's that?
Satchitananda and beyond. Beyond Satchitananda. That place where it enfolds the levels of life. We point to here when we talk about it, but we know it's not a here, isn't it? We point to here, but it's not here. But we know it, isn't it? We do know it.
And it's a matter of trusting, isn't it, that we don't have to deal with everything on that emotional level.
So what is it we trust in then? What is it that you've discovered, that you can now say is real, that therefore we can use the word trust in relationship to? Because it has to be something if we have trust in it, doesn't it? Like this, we point to here, as though it's a place, knowing it's not a place. And yet if we just put our hand here, it's enough to remind us. It's instant, isn't it? Instant. You only have to do this. Ah, there it is. So we can call it something then, can't we? Because like this is not the place where it resides, it's a place where we can bring us to that recognition and remembrance, isn't it? Do you see?
Disconnected.
Disconnected. That's right. Disconnected.
Disconnected.
Yes.
When we come back into that connection,
Yes.
because I've had some funny things go on that you know, when the mind's got in there and she's gone on little trips.
Doesn't it take you?
Judgments and
no, a trip,
and
I
then,
tell you.
and then coming back into that place of getting out of that mind, I suppose.
Yes.
And coming down into a more grounded space, then it seems to evolve. And it's often not what you thought it was.
Exactly. Exactly and
Just
precisely.
Our little perceptions
Yes,
and
you bet.
all our little stuff that goes on that we
Yes.
jump into these
Yes.
mental frames.
Yes.
But when we come back into ourselves and just drop down, I suppose that's sort of like dropping down into ourselves.
Exactly. Exactly.
And connect up again.
Yes.
It all kind of
It's
becomes clear.
absolutely. I have a very good, well, it's just my own little experience of these last days too. Because, perhaps a little bit of my history, when yoga was my life, from the age of 16 years old, I found it. I found the answers in yoga, Hindu yoga. And so for all of those years, this was this thread that was through my life. I could go in to do the salute to the sun and it was there. Or if I lay down, it was there. It was just like a trigger, So that was the thread, the saving grace in all of the vicissitudes and experiences of life. I would go into the salute to the sun, and there it was, I was there. So then, of course, in those years with Divine Mother, that all dropped away, because, of course, it becomes an addiction. It was an addiction for me. I could opt out. I just do my salute to the sun. Phew, there I was, off with the fairies. It was all... And of course now I've started doing yoga again. So guess what? So it's just an example. it doesn't go away. You know what I mean?
Yes.
It doesn't go away.
Yes.
The trigger is there,
Yes.
like this.
Yes.
You see what is being said here?
Yeah, the triggers are there, aren't they?
They're there,
Always there.
always there. So it's like that. You know. Oh, bye. But yes, that's just a funny aside. But again, of course, there is a relationship to that. So what is our trigger? What does bring us back to this? What is your trigger? We all have them. We all have them. What is it that snaps us back? And there it goes again.
Find it for myself, if I get a little bit of that, like if I slow things down,
Yes.
come into that,
Mm-hmm.
that how can I say? It's an interesting question, actually.
It is, isn't it? It's an interesting question to ponder, isn't it?
Find exactly what it is.
Yes.
Because there's something I know I do it, but when I go to explain,
Think about it, you can't explain it. Yes. You don't have the words. We don't have the words, and yet we have that we know can do it just like this. Can do. But what about this other question? Again, what is this? Is this energy that's around at the moment? What does it crystallize for each of us? Distraction? What is it? There's a commonality that's there at the moment. All the phone calls, all the visits, it's the same thing. Same thing. The essence of it is the same. So you have to recognize it as some kind of energetic that's there, that's trying to pull us.
I've seen a lot of what I've described as jumping the gun.
All right, all right. Yes, 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 yes.
You know, just
Like an over.
perhaps it's a need to be right.
All right.
You
Aha.
know, like we think we know how it is.
Uh-huh.
We think we know how it is.
Yes.
You can see it very clearly,
All right.
and just
Yes. And what's that got to do with when it comes down to it? It's got to do with our ego. Yes, got to do with me.
Until someone snatches from the past.
Got to do with me. I need to be right. I need to be in control. Yes.
I'm not being heard.
I'm not. Yes. Not being understood.
This is the way I want it.
The things I'm trying to do are not recognized.
We give lots of gifts at Christmas, don't we?
Until someone gives you that fix back in the day.
And still, yes, we